So this holy hell, my room is hot. Hey guys, ignore the mess in the back, but we are going to be reviewing Demon in My View from the Den of Shadows Quartet. Now, before I get into the actual review and talk about the book, I'm actually going to give a quick disclaimer. I did not know that in the Forest of the Night, Amelia, the author, published it while she was about 15 years old, and upon reading Demon in My View, which is the second book in the Den of Shadows Quartet, we actually see a gigantic improvement in Amelia's writing, and this was only published a year later, making Amelia 16. I've got to admit, that's really impressive. So let's get into it. Now, Demon in My View follows a character named Jessica, who is a 17-year-old high school student. She is a writer, and she had published a book that is about vampires, paranormal creatures in general living amongst humans. She didn't realize it was actually true. So one of her characters walks into her life, and he doesn't know whether to kill her or make her his. So the book opens up with the first chapter of the introduction to Jessica and how she goes to school and how a lot of people stay away from her and how all of these classmates that she grew up with did not like her and were never given an explanation on why they don't like her, and we're kind of given a view of how Jessica is. And when a second main character is introduced named Karen, she has an instant dislike to this girl. So Karen's trying to be nice to her, and she's just being cold and callous, and then Karen straight up is like, what is wrong with you? Why are you being so nasty with me? And then Jessica is just like, that's how I am. Live with it. So then after the first chapter, introduction with Jessica, we're thrown into a chapter with Karen, and we find out that she is actually part of the secret society that lives amongst humans, and that she is a witch from a line of witches called Smoke. Now the thing is that we were immediately thrown these type of witches because in the first book, the only witches we were introduced were the immortal witches called Trieste. And the thing that I find really irksome in this book is that Amelia will throw out lore and give just a bullet point of what they are. So for example, the line of witches, all we know is that they are mortal and they come from a line of witches. And there are 4, but we're never told about the other 3. We're told about the Smoke line, Karen's line. We hear from Karen that there's another line that's super powerful, and the other 2 are mentioned by names, but we have no idea what they do or who they are. And the same thing with the Trieste immortal witches. We get their information from the first book, but in the second book, they're only mentioned. And this is what I don't like about Amelia's writing, is that she throws out lore and she throws out these big names, and sometimes we never meet these characters. And it really brings us out of the chapter because, for example, say that Karen and another character are talking, and then one of them will throw out this random character's name and talk about how powerful and strong they are, and we never meet them. So then we find out that Karen and her mother is described with light hair and plump, while Karen is described with light hair and blue eyes. They were moved to that city by their leader, Dominique Vida. And the thing is, in this chapter, we're not introduced to Dominique. We're told about Dominique, and we're told that Dominique is very strong. She is emotionless because having emotions can cause hesitation during a fight, and that she's a vampire hunter. That's all we know. And it was a really short chapter, but we got so much info dump about Dominique and how Karen and her coven, I'm going to call them coven, but they say line, and it just, Karen and her coven were just thrown there because they were looking for Jessica, because they want to question Jessica on how she knows this, if she's just a human and humans shouldn't know the secret paranormal societies. So then we get Jessica, and she's coming back home from school. Her and her adopted mother kind of get into it, and we are shown in the second chapter a flashback of Jessica and her adopted mother not really getting along. Basically, the adopted mother, Anne, is begging Jessica not to get in trouble this school year, and Jessica is being snarky and it's like, you're not my real mom, don't tell me what to do. And then Anne's like, I'm the closest thing to a mother you'll ever get. And then Jessica's like, well, at least my real mother had the sense to put me up for adoption early. So within chapters 3 and 4, we find out that Jessica is a writer that goes under a pen name Ash Knight. We find out that her first book, Tiger Tiger, is about Risika, who is the main character of In the Forest of the Night. Jessica has this dream about a vampire named Jaslyn, and we are informed by the narrator that Jessica has these dreams frequently. And what I don't understand is, if she had these dreams frequently, why didn't the story open up with one of Jaslyn's dreams? Why did we have to wait till chapter 4 to be thrown into this plotline? Now, the dream about Jaslyn is that it's basically the origin story is, I can't really remember. And then Jessica wakes up out of this nightmare and she goes to take a shower. After her shower and after she dresses, Jessica stops herself to admire herself in a mirror. And she literally starts the paragraph with this sentence: Jessica knew she had the body and the face to die for. And then she goes on to description, like an entire big ass paragraph about how Jessica's skin is flawless and her classmates have acne, how Jessica is thin and well toned, but she doesn't work out, how her hair is the envy of every other girl's hair, and how her eyes are so beautiful and so green. So Jessica goes to school in a very good mood, surprisingly. But as soon as she sees Karen pass by, her cheer just vanishes. And I was like, why do you not like this girl? Why do you have this instant hatred for poor Karen? And we're never given an insight in Jessica's mind to understand why she had a dislike for Karen. So at this point in the story, we end up meeting Aubrey, and Aubrey was the main villain in the first book. He had lost to Risika. Well, he's in this book, and he is the love interest. And when Jessica first sees him, she describes him to a T. She describes his black luscious hair, his flawless white skin, and his beautiful black eyes. So the reason why Aubrey's at that school, he is enrolling himself to be closer to Jessica, and he's going by the human name Alex Remington. And the thing is, when Jessica first sees him, she's like, oh my god, it's my character, it's Aubrey, oh my god. You know, she's questioning if he's just a fan or if he's just cosplaying the character, or is it like she's in denial that it could possibly be him. So then we come to find out that Aubrey, or Alex, is placed in Jessica and Karen's class. And Jessica automatically notices how Karen is around Aubrey. Then, after the bell rings, she watches Shannon, a classmate of hers, go up to Aubrey and kind of flirt with him. And we learn that Jessica thinks that she's a slut because she's flirting with Aubrey when she has a boyfriend. So after that, she goes to have lunch and sketch people, and then she sees that Shannon's boyfriend is getting in Aubrey's face, and Aubrey uses his vampire magic to make him go away or to scare off the boyfriend. And then he comes up to her. So these two start talking. There is a clear difference on how she treats Aubrey and how she treats Karen. They start talking about Karen, and she's like, oh, do you know her? And he's like, yes. And then Karen realizes that they're both staring at her, so she gets up and runs away. And then we're thrown into a chapter with Karen, and how Karen talks about how Aubrey is evil and how she needs to talk to Jessica and keep her away from him. And while she's spying on these two, Aubrey has a telepathic conversation with Karen and kind of taunts her. Then Jessica goes to a bookstore to go see her book because it's so exciting to see her published work out in the world. And then she sees Karen and she's instantly deflated, and Karen's trying to be friendly, and Karen's like, oh, what if the author stories were real, ha ha ha. And then Jessica turns around and she's like, you know what, I try to be rude, I try to be offensive. What is it gonna take for you to realize that I do not like you? I don't want to talk to you. And she never gives a reason why. why she doesn't like Karen and why she doesn't want to be friends. So Karen ends up leaving defeated, and guess who's at the bookstore? That's right, Aubrey. Aubrey and Jessica end up having like a really cringy conversation. It's really flirtatious. She's really open with him. And then when he goes to go pay for his book, we see that Hassana, Karen's mother, is the cashier. And in front of Aubrey, Hassana warns Jessica. He gets mad and he walks away. And then the next few chapters are Aubrey chapters. We learn how he found Jessica. And apparently, a vampire that he knows works in the publishing house that Jessica sent her manuscript that is waiting to be published. And the vampire saw and read the manuscript and was like, hey, this is Aubrey. I gotta warn him. And that's how Aubrey found out about Jessica. Then we're introduced to the villain of the story, Fala. Tell me why she was the only vampire that was introduced being born in Egypt and having dark skin. That is a very problematic element, and I'm not going to get into this right now. I'll get into it at the end of the video, but let's just put a pin in that real quick, okay? So Fala basically tells Aubrey that he needs to kill Jessica because she is a threat to the vampire kind because of her book Tiger Tiger exposing the paranormal secret societies out to the world. A lot of vampire hunters know where they're at and is killing off their brethren. So after him and Fala have that small tiff, he ends up leaving because apparently he was invited to a cabin in the woods type of party by Shannon, and he's hungry and he needs to go feed. Now, the thing about Amelia's writing is that we are constantly told things we are not shown, and I have mentioned how Amelia has a habit of throwing out lore and information with just giving us a small of the history of what she's throwing out. And I was really upset by the way we were introduced to a new paranormal creature. So I'm going to read it to you because it tells us everything and nothing. The full moon was about a week away still, but Aubrey could still easily sense a few untrained witches and some werewolves lurking in the busy forest. This is how we're introduced to werewolves. We're not shown the werewolves. We are told about these werewolves. I would have really loved to see it instead of being told. For example, Amelia could have written this paragraph to bring us more into the story. But the way to introduce the werewolves is that maybe something ran by, and when he turned, he saw a pack of werewolves running by, and one of them stopped, I don't know, something funny, to pee on a tree, and they make eye contact, and the werewolf was like, oh shit, and then run away. After being told there are werewolves in this world, we never, ever, ever see a fucking werewolf. Never. And I am a werewolf girly. I'm like, I need to know more about these werewolves. Come on. Aubrey gets to the party, right? And out of all of the people in that house, he picks a drunk Shannon to feed off of. So Karen's at that party and she ends up sensing Aubrey and running out. And instead of fighting this guy, she decides to sacrifice her blood to save Shannon. And this is supposed to be a very serious scene because we're supposed to see if we could trust Aubrey to pull away from Karen before he drains her dry. And we see how caring Karen is by sacrificing her blood. Because if witch's blood is drunk by vampires, they lose their power or they get weaker, and it takes years for them to regain that magic. So during this very intense scene that it was supposed to have like an emotional impact on the reader, the scene is broken up by a telepathic conversation between Aubrey and Karen. Aubrey's all like, ooh, you taste good. And then Karen's like, I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or a threat. And he's like, would you rather it hurt? We really didn't need that conversation because I feel that conversation actually brought us out of that emotional investment that Amelia wanted us to have in this scene. So then we are thrown back into a chapter with Jessica and she's asleep in the tree and Aubrey is being a fucking creep and watching her sleep. During this scene, she actually had a dream about Jaslyn. We learned that Jaslyn, she had memories of her vampire life and how she remembered crying at her husband's grave and a witch named Monica, and that's it. So they have this really cringy conversation and Aubrey's like, maybe I am stalking you, ha ha ha, and then Jessica's like, well then I'll be flattered. Ew. We're gonna move past that because Jessica, you got some problems. Then while they're talking, Aubrey is assessing Jessica and trying to figure her out. And he goes back to I think a nightclub called Las Noches. Luckily, it is hidden from the curiosity of humans. So Aubrey and Fala have a conversation basically about nothing. And at this point of the story, Karen decides to go to Jessica and reveal that Jessica's in danger and that everything is true. And then when she goes to her house and Jessica sees her, she's instantly disgusted and she doesn't want to talk to her. But then as soon as Karen mentions Alex, aka Aubrey, she's like, let's go talk in my room. Anyways, they go up to her room and Karen is trying to say, what if it's real? What if it's real? And Jessica, being in denial, is like, get the fuck out of my room. And Karen's like, I knew you would react like this. Here's a letter. And then she leaves, and then Jessica drowns herself in music. And then we find out that Jessica did read the letter. And Karen had written that only with Jessica's permission she'll reveal everything. And she mentions two of her ancestors. And Jessica's like, oh my god, I have never written those names in any of my books that have been published. They're just in the manuscripts waiting to be published. It's real? It's real? Everything I've written is real? I'm gonna need proof. So she goes out to look for new mayhem by herself. Instead of calling Karen or Aubrey, told to the readers that Jessica knows that she would be in danger because of all the secrets that she spilled in her book, Tiger. She's gonna go to new mayhem because she needs proof. So she ends up finding new mayhem, going into Las Noches Club where Fala is at. So Fala threatens Jessica. Jessica runs out filled with all of these emotions and disbelief that her characters are real. That world is real. And she runs into Aubrey and they have a very cringy and dry conversation. And while she's talking to Aubrey, he is just assessing her and he's talking about her beauty and her beautiful emerald eyes. And then we get another chapter of the conversation continued and Jessica is so filled with emotion and she slaps him. She slaps him out of nowhere. Apparently the act wasn't on purpose. It was just because she was just so filled up with emotion. And Aubrey kisses her. For a romance reader like I am, you would know that this is a very popular trope where the two main characters are arguing and they're so filled with emotions and then one of them slaps one of them and they start kissing and making out. I have read this trope executed so well in different other books, but in this book I was just, it did not satisfy me at all. I was just like, So after this cringy scene or chapter, Jessica goes back home and has a dream about Jaslyn. So the dream basically tells the readers about Jaslyn and her sire, Siete, and how he always wanted her to be a vampire and she said no because she had a husband and she was happy. And then her husband dies and then she has nothing in her life and then she accepts his invitation to be a vampire. Now Jessica wakes up and she realizes that she actually needs to talk to Karen because she needs information on Jaslyn. When she goes downstairs, she sees her adopted mother getting ready for church. She accepts her invitation because Anne was like, oh yeah, Hassana and Karen's gonna be there. Do you want to join us? She goes, whatever. So Hassana and Anne are actually talking pretty far away in front of the church and Jessica grabs Karen, pulls her aside, and then she's like, we need to talk. And Karen's like, why? And before Jessica could say anything, Karen looks up and has a horrified look on her face. And when Jessica turns, she sees an unknown vampire holding on to Anne. And she bounds towards the vampire and punches him in the face. If you train to punch people, it won't hurt. But if you have never punched anybody in your life, it's gonna fucking hurt. And we don't get any indication that it hurts Jessica. So after she punches the vampire, she barely has time to check on Anne because the vampire bitch slaps her and she ends up falling over. So the vampire doesn't attack her. The vampire run off and Karen's like, oh my god, Jessica, are you okay? And then Jessica like shoves her away and she's like, I'm fine. How's Anne? And Hassana comes up to Jessica, puts a hand on her shoulder and is like, oh honey, I'm so sorry. That's how we find out that Anne was just murdered. We also find that there is a letter stuffed in Anne's hand. And when Jessica pulls it out, it is a page from her manuscript, Dark Flame, the book about Aubrey. And in the back, written in Fala's handwriting, is stay in your place. I had a big problem with this chapter. I honestly did not care that Anne died because I had no idea who this character was. She had no relationship with Jessica. We didn't see Jessica have any character growth from Anne. Any indication that she and Anne had bonded And we didn't get that. We got nothing. So unfortunately, this just felt like a really cheap death to move the story forward. We get a glimpse of Aubrey, and he is arguing with Fala, and he is questioning why Fala really wants Jessica dead. So then after that, we are thrown back with Jessica, and she is at Karen's house. So we are introduced to Dominique. We are given no skin tone, no hair color, no eye color of Dominique. Just Dominique. She ends up going to sleep and having a dream about Jaslyn. Now, this is where we actually get the actual climax of the glimpses that we have been seeing of Jaslyn, and it turns out that in 1983 she had went back to go visit her husband's grave, and he had died in 1960. That was the year that she had transformed into a vampire. And then she reveals to the readers that when she was transformed into a vampire, she was actually pregnant. How far along was she? We actually have no idea. So then we are informed that because Yete's blood coursing through her veins, it actually caused the fetus in her womb to be suspended in time, never ever growing to full term. At her husband's grave, Jaslyn throws herself on her husband's gravestone and is sobbing and crying and mourning the loss of her human life, regretting her choice of becoming a vampire. So Jaslyn is mourning a relationship, a life that she was never given the chance, a life of what if her husband never died and they raised their daughter together? What if she never became a vampire? And as this is going on, we are introduced to Monica Smoke. Monica is a very powerful witch, and she confronts Jaslyn and she's like, "Why are you crying?" And Jaslyn opens up, spills everything as if she is confessing the biggest sin to Monica. And Monica's like, "Hey, I'm a very powerful witch. I could transform you into human." And Jaslyn jumps at that opportunity because she doesn't want to be a vampire anymore. So in this chapter, we as readers are informed that the reason why Jessica is actually having all of these memories of other vampires is because she was that baby that lived for years suspended in time in Jaslyn's womb, and she was just absorbing all of Jaslyn's memories and all of the information that her mother would get from other vampires. So Jessica wakes up, runs downstairs, and find out that Hasana is actually Monica's sister. And Hasana tells Jessica, "Oh yeah, my sister did die trying to bring a vampire to life." Jessica was like, "Oh my god, Jaslyn's my mother." And she just has all these feelings, and then she feels the pull of writing. So she starts to write her mother's story. So after writing her mother's story, she's like, "I need to get out of this house." And she ends up leaving and going to Las Noches to go talk to Aubrey. And once again, they have a really dry and cringy conversation, and it's like trying to be flirtatious, trying to be intimate, but it was just really cringy to me. And not once has Jessica mentioned to Aubrey that Anne is dead, kind of solidifying the thought that Jessica really didn't care about Anne. So after their cringy conversation, Aubrey leaves Jessica at Las Noches and goes out to hunt. And then he crashes into Dominique fighting a minor character that was mentioned in previous chapters. And he manages to like fight Dominique and then distract her long enough for him and the minor character to run away. And after he runs away from Dominique, he kind of gets worried about Jessica. And then we are thrown back to Jessica, and she's trying to go back to Karen's house. And she crashes into Fala. And the next chapters were so boring. And it's supposed to be this amazing fight. But it's not. It is just so boring and dry and long. And even though they're talking, even though there's dialogue, it did not stick with me. What did stick with me was that Jessica managed to hold her own against a vampire. Especially that vampire is thousands of years old. So Fala ends up beating the shit out of Jessica to the point of death, but Jessica managed to cut her arm open. So cool, I guess. And then Fala runs off because she got her arm cut open, so she runs off. And then Aubrey's waiting for her, and then Fala kind of just tells him basically, "Yeah, I tried to kill her. She's by the river. I hope she's dead." And then Aubrey goes to where Jessica's at, stares down at her, and instead of picking her up, swallowing his pride, taking her to the coven of witches and being like, "Please help me, please heal her," He leaves her there, teleports to Karen's house, kidnaps Karen, throws her in front of a dying Jessica, and tells her to heal Jessica. Now, mind you, Jessica's dying, and these two characters, Karen and Aubrey, are having a conversation. And Karen's like, I'm not strong enough. You drank my blood. I can't heal her. And then he's like, well, do something, try. And she's like, well, I'm going to have to use your vampiric energy to heal her, but it could kill both of us. And he's like, okay, let's do it. Let's save her. Karen uses Aubrey's vampiric energy to heal Jessica, but she is not strong enough to do that. She mentions a line of witches. We are never introduced to this line of witches. She just mentions this name and how strong they are. That's it. Because Karen is not that strong, she manages to heal Jessica just a little bit. Karen faints. Aubrey's like, no, Jessica, no. So they have a telepathic conversation, and bottom line, he asks her, do you want to be a vampire? And she's like, do you have to ask? So he cuts open his wrist and he feeds his blood to a dying Jessica. Now, Jessica's feeding from him and she ends up kind of blacking out. She has a final dream about Jaslyn. In this dream, we readers are informed that Jaslyn was in constant pain, and the first thing she did as a human was go to church and confess all of her sins, and kind of gave an abridged version to the priest so he wouldn't go insane. And then after that, formed that Jaslyn is super excited because her baby is no longer suspended in time but actually coming to full term. And she is so excited because she thought she was going to have a second chance for her to raise her and Carl's child. And then when Jessica was born, Jessica was a reminder of Jaslyn's vampiric past, because Jessica looked nothing like Carl or her. Jessica actually looked like her sire, Siete. Jessica had his green eyes, flawless white skin, and his black hair. Jaslyn realized that Jessica would be a constant reminder of her horrible, painful past, that every time she looked at her child, she would just shudder, or comb her child's hair, just constant memories of being a vampire. So she did the best thing that she thought she should do, and that was give Jessica up for adoption. And the last thought she had while looking at her daughter before placing her in front of a church, she hoped that Jessica would never become intertwined with her vampiric past. So Aubrey ends up taking both girls to a house he rarely uses in Mayhem. And once Jessica is a vampire, he ends up leaving her side to go confront Fala. He ends up coming up behind Fala and putting a knife to her neck. And there was a line that gave me the ick, and I'm going to read it to you. Despite her caution, a thin line of blood appeared on her dark Egyptian skin. That line just gave me the ick, because why is it that Fala is the only person of color and yet she is the villain? Okay, we're not going to get into it. Let's just continue on because we're already at the climax of the story. So while he's holding Fala with the knife to her neck, Jessica managed to wash her face and come in to threaten Fala, and her threat was so dumb. She basically tells Fala, do not come near anybody I care about. Do not come near me or all of your secrets will be published into the world. And my first thought was, did you really threaten Fala with do not come near anybody I care about? You have shown throughout this entire book that you don't care about anybody but Aubrey. You don't care about Karen. You didn't care about Anne, and poor Anne is dead. You have no friendships, but a very unhealthy one with Aubrey. That was a very dumb threat, Jessica. So after that, she ends up leaving to go feed. And we actually see how comfortable she is as a vampire. In the first book, we are informed by the main character, Risika, that when humans are transformed into vampires, they actually forget that they were humans, and slowly their memories return through the years of them being vampires. I understand that Jessica was suspended in time in her mother's womb, and that's why she was able to bypass that. But what I really would have liked is that Jessica had that amnesia, and Aubrey was there for her to teach her how to become a vampire and to help her remember her human memories, to kind of grow in a relationship. And then she returns to Aubrey's home, and then it's kind of insinuated that Jessica is living with Aubrey and that they are a couple, and he's really upset that he had to bring her computer, and they have another cringy conversation about her not being able to stay out of trouble and her teasing him about him making her stay out of trouble. And that was the end of the book. And I was like, fucking finally. Now, I'm not going to rate this book at all. I am going to talk about certain things that I did not like. And we are going to talk about the problematic element that gave me the ick. So let's start with Jessica. I did not like Jessica as a main character. There was no character growth in Jessica. I really wish there was a moment inside of her that turned to other characters and was kind and had a relationship with them, or a hint of a relationship, or a growing relationship. Then there is the writing of all telling and no showing. We were constantly told things and never really shown anything. We were constantly told information that wasn't really needed. For example, we were getting names of characters that we never met in the story. We're getting small tad bits of them, like how strong they were, certain things they did in a certain lifetime, that. And it would always bring me out of the story, and it felt like it was not necessary. Also, the writing style of Amelia, where she is trying to have such serious moments in the book, but it's always brought out with dialogue or something that didn't really fit the scene. Those were the smaller things that kind of iffed me, but the really big thing that gave me the ick was that Fala, the only person of color, was the villain. And not only that, she's the only vampire that we're ever told of her origin of birth and her skin tone. Throughout the story, we are introduced to characters, but we are never told their skin tones. Jess, Aubrey, and Jessica, but a majority of them are not even given descriptions. Like Jaeger, we don't even get a description of him. We don't even get a description of Dominique. Because she was born in Egypt, her dialogue constantly had Egyptian gods, or her talking about Egypt, or her bringing up her culture or heritage. But we don't get that with the other vampires, but just with Fala. So that's why Fala being the only person of color and the villain was a very problematic element in this book. Now, I'm not going to bash on Amelia because I understand she had written this book in 2000 and she was about 16 years old. And I was informed by a mutual that Amelia Atwater Rhodes, they did take a look back on their writing and realized how problematic it was. Amelia did tell the public that they ended up taking a look within themselves and realizing where that problematic element of writing came from, and that they were going to educate themselves and teach themselves to write better stories without harming a marginalized group of people. And that's actually really great. That's really exciting. This book was not what I remember. And rereading it broke my heart. And looking back, I realized that 11-year-old Moo had no knowledge of what I have today. And that inner child of mine is really sad now that she knows problematic elements in writing. And I can't be mad at my inner child. I can't be mad at my younger self. And child Moo had been in that bubble that a lot of children are. And unfortunately, bubbles pop. So by the time I was 13, I was already getting microaggression, internalized racism, or straight up racism, or witnessing racism and hate crimes being thrown to my family. So that's the knowledge that I gained to be able to pick up a book and say, oop, something in this book is problematic, not gonna like this. And try to educate people on these problematic things. Because I lived through that. My sister lived through it. My family members lived through it. And for a white author to come forward, reread their old books and say, that's a little icky, and realize problematic elements in their writing, I say that is growth as an author, as a person. Hi guys, it's me editing Moo. It turns out the last part of my video got corrupted, so I have to redo some clips. So I'm just going to start off with the last thing I said. Because of Amelia's growth as a writer and realizing problematic elements in her writing is actually one of the reasons that I do want to read one of her books that she has just written in the last few years. But unfortunately, I do only have 2 omnibuses of her older works that were all published in the early 2000s. Now, I am going to finish the last 2 books, Shattered Mirror and Midnight Predator, and if those 2 books are as problematic as Demon in My View, I will be either giving the book away or tearing it into pieces and making arts and crafts out of it. I am actually going to be looking into my libraries to see if they have any of Amelia's recent works, and if they do, I will be reading one of those. So, this is the end of the video and my review for Demon in My View. Now, if any of you guys have actually read these books when you were younger, let's start a conversation in the comments. I'll see you guys later. Bye!